Please be seated.
All settled, Mr. Jovanovic, Mr. McCloskey, and others about the documents?
Yes, Mr. President. And also, just before I forget, Mr. Van der Pooijer looked over the list of Borolchen documents, and we have no objection.
Okay. Any objections from the other defense teams? None. So those documents are admitted. Before I give you the floor, Ms. Favreau, you filed a motion today for the addition and your 65th list of part of disclosure consisting in video. This would relate to a witness who is scheduled to testify on Monday. Is there any objection on your part, Mr. McCloskey, or do you wish to take time?
No objection.
All right. Any objection from the other defense teams? So, there being no objection, the motion is granted. Next, Ms. Favreau, how long do you think your...
Monsieur le Président, je terminerai certainement.
Mrs. Favreau, I should finish today, but I expect I will go to the final moment of this session, maybe a few minutes early. Your Honours, this case has been brought to court by the prosecution. It is therefore on the prosecution that the burden of the proof lies. Defense has no obligation to supply any evidence. Innocence, any accused, in this case General Miletić, is presumed innocence. Innocence need not be proven. Defense of General Miletić has, however, chosen to provide evidence to contribute to the quest for truth. These pieces of evidence will confirm in an incontrovertible manner the innocence of General Miletić. Criminal responsibility is individual and personal. No responsibility can be established on the simple fact that one is a member of the Serbian people or the army of Republika Srpska. The responsibility of an individual cannot be established simply by belonging to the army of Republika Srpska, being a general, and occupying a specific function. The prosecution has to supply evidence beyond reasonable doubt that the accused has committed criminal crimes and committed them with a criminal intent. As for General Miletić, we consider such evidence does not exist. We will try and show we will show that General Miletić had no criminal intent and that he committed no acts which could be defined as criminal. This case has seen an allegation of a joint criminal enterprise. It is an interesting construct from the prosecution's point of view, but a very dangerous one for justice as a whole. Indeed, there is a risk of confusing innocent and guilty persons. To avoid such a trap, we will have to examine evidence with great caution. Indeed, contacts, relationship between different individuals do not as such mean that all these individuals are part of a joint criminal enterprise. In this case, there is an obvious relationship between the different units and the different individuals, between the main staff of the Republika Srpska, the subordinate bodies, including the Drina Corps, and the brigade subordinated to the cause. This link alone cannot substantiate and cannot be used as a proof of a joint criminal enterprise. It is just the normal structural organization of an army and of the chain of command. The simple fact that individuals communicate, that they have contacts, cannot substantiate a joint criminal enterprise. Therefore, when an officer of the Drina Corps turns to General Miletić for a piece of information, it doesn't mean that General Miletić is part of the joint criminal enterprise. It simply means that he is doing his job. The criminal intention of General Miletić cannot be derived solely from the fact that General Miletić was called upon. What we have to try and establish is what General Miletić did and said. His deeds, and only his deeds and his intent, are vital in establishing or disproving his responsibility. In no instance should he be held accountable for acts committed by others. Much circumstantial and indirect evidence has been supplied in this case. We will show that these documents, testimonies, and evidence supplied by the prosecution has led to a number of conclusions, and we will draw other conclusions from these elements, conclusions that are more likely and more reasonable. What charges has the prosecution brought against General Miletić? Under paragraph 75 of the indictment, he is being accused of making life unbearable for the inhabitants of the enclave in that he drafted Directive Number 7 signed by President Karadzic, and in that he took part in and helped the policy set out in Directive 7 to restrict humanitarian aid to the Muslim population of Srebrenica and Žepa. He is also being charged with wanting to defeat the military forces militarily. This is a perfectly legitimate goal in a situation of war, and he is also being charged with wanting to control the movement of Muslim population out of the enclave. The basis for these allegations is the position that General Miletić held, or would have held, in 1995 in the Army of Republika Srpska. We disagree slightly with the prosecution as to the functions of General Miletić in 1995. But as I have already said, whatever his job, whatever General Miletić's job, it is not sufficient to establish criminal responsibility. You also have to identify and prove criminal intent and deeds that substantiate such a criminal intent. To refute the prosecutor's allegation, we will specify a number of things. First of all, the position in which General Miletić actually was in 1995. His role in drafting Directive Number 7. The reasons justifying the policy of the Army of Republika Srpska relating to the transit of humanitarian convoys, the authorization procedure for humanitarian convoys, and the role of General Miletić in relation to humanitarian aid. And also we will establish the general situation in the area of responsibility of the Drina Corps in the spring and summer of 1995, and the role General Miletić played in the events that unfolded in July 1995 in and around Srebrenica and Žepa. The prosecutor alleges that General Miletić represented General Milanović when he was absent, and that his representation was valid for a large part of 1995. The prosecutor, however, was very vague in establishing the exact period of time when General Milanović was not at his post. We intend to prove you that in the first half of 1995, General Milanović was indeed present at the main staff of the Republika Srpska army in Crna Rijeka. We also intend to prove that during that same time, when General Milanović was not in Crna Rijeka, he was not in Western Bosnia, but specifically in the area of responsibility of the Drina Corps. Indeed, a forward command post was established in Zvornik, and General Milanović spent some time there, briefly indeed, but long enough to know exactly the situation in the region, much better indeed than General Miletić would have known it, as he was remaining in Crna Rijeka. We will also bring evidence to identify the specific role and function played by General Miletić within the main staff of the Army of Republika Srpska when General Milovanovic was not there. We are not saying that General Miletić was not the Chief of Operations and Training. Operations and Training is indeed a body within the staff of the main staff of the Army of Republika Srpska. We will, however, show that in discharging his duties, contrary to what the prosecution claims, he was not involved in the military operations led by corps and brigades. Corps and brigades have their own officers in charge of operations, which lead these operations. We intend to give proof of the way in which such operations are planned and conducted at the different levels of the hierarchy within the Army of Republika Srpska. We hope to show that General Miletić could not and was not involved in the military operations, both tactical and operational, and that he was not involved in the activities of the Army of Republika Srpska in Srebrenica and Žepa. We shall show that General Miletić had other obligations and duties within the staff of the VRS main staff, and that even if he had wanted to do so, he could not cover and monitor each of the operations conducted by each of the corps and brigades on the front line in Republika Srpska. The prosecutor has tried to convince you that when General Milovanovic was not there, General Miletić stood in for him. We are not saying that when General Milovanovic was not there, General Miletić was not standing in for him within the staff. But I must insist on the fact that he was only standing in for him in the staff and not in the main staff command of VRS. We must draw a clear distinction between staff and command. We shall bring evidence that will shed light on the way in which the main staff was organized so that no one may confuse command and staff. This should also enable us to understand clearly where and when and in what function General Miletić could stand in for General Milovanovic. We also intend to show that General Milovanovic's functions within the main staff command of VRS was never discontinued, even when he was in Western Bosnia. Indeed, when General Milovanovic was not in a position to discharge some of his duties within command, some of these functions, contrary to the staff functions, were not transferred on to General Miletić, but passed on to other generals serving within the main staff of VRS. Indeed, some of these functions were covered by General Mladic himself. According to the indictment, Directive number 7 is the beginnings of the JCE, which General Miletić would have taken part in. We shall give evidence relating to Directive 7, and we shall show that this directive is first and foremost a directive, a military act legitimate in and of itself. We are not denying the fact that General Miletić would have taken part in the drafting of this directive, or more specifically to the formatting of the directive. We shall show that the formatting of this directive, as is the case for any directive or any similar military act, is the usual, forms part rather of the usual duties of the officer in charge of operations. We shall present evidence concerning the operations within the main staff of VRS and the decision-making process within its command structure. You shall hear General Massal, who drafted Directive number 9. He will explain how a directive, an order, or any other military decision is thought through, drafted and formatted. We hope that such evidence will help us understand precisely what role General Miletić played in the drafting of Directive 7. By identifying the specific role of General Miletić vis-à-vis Directive 7, we hope to show that there is no evidence attributing to General Miletić the infamous sentence incriminated in the indictment. This directive is not a directive of General Miletić. It is an act by the Supreme Commander, President Karadzic. If the prosecution wants to prove General Miletić's responsibility vis-à-vis this sentence, he must show that General Miletić wrote it, and there must be no reasonable doubt that he didn't do so. We intend to show that there is no evidence that the incriminating sentence was thought or drafted by General Miletić. Why are we convinced that General Miletić did not write this sentence? We rely indeed, to answer that question, on the evidence that has already been supplied and the evidence that we shall supply. As I have said, the allegations of the prosecutor are based solely on the functions of General Miletić, who would have stood in for General Milivanovic and therefore would have been the main advisor to General Mladić. However, the prosecutor has never indicated where General Milivanovic was in February-March 1995, at the time when Directive Number 7 was drafted. We shall show that General Milivanovic was at his post during that time. His post as Chief of Staff of the VRS, serving in the main staff of the VRS. He was not at the forward command post in Western Bosnia. He was serving in the main staff at Crna Rijeka. As you have already seen, General Milivanovic has signed the transmission letter under which Directive Number 7 was sent to the First Krajina Corps. We shall give evidence that General Milivanovic did not only transmit Directive Number 7 to the First Krajina Corps, but also to the other corps. He personally signed this cover letter to the Directive Number 7, to the Sarajevo Corps, to the Herzegovina Corps, and to the Drino Corps. You should learn that on the eve of sending Directive Number 7 to the subordinate unit, General Milivanovic attended a lengthy meeting with President Karadzic. As the Directive Number 7 was being drafted in February-March 1995, General Milivanovic was indeed serving in the main staff at Crna Rijeka. He was discharging fully his functions as Chief of Staff of the VRS. He was available to advise General Mladić and to make a contribution to the drafting of the infamous directive. We will also look at the reasons that brought about the drafting of Directive Number 7, and we shall show that at the end of January 1995, the VRS had its annual meeting at which the commanders of the corps proposed tasks that they felt they could and should carry out during 1995. You shall hear that President Karadzic attended that meeting and set the tasks of the army down. We are not questioning the fact that the officer in charge of operations has to format the directive as identified by the commander and its staff. However, we shall show that once the text has been drafted, the President, as Supreme Commander, as signatory of the directive, can bring final amendments and corrections to the draft. The incriminating sentence, according to the indictment, can perfectly have been amongst the amendments and corrections brought by President Karadzic. We have all heard General Milivanovic say that he didn't remember Directive Number 7 and that he had no knowledge of it. We shall show you orders signed by General Milivanovic referring to Directive Number 7. The orders that are built and founded on Directives Number 7 and 7.1. These are not orders sent out under the authority of General Milevanović, but orders that he personally signed. We shall show also that the subsequent directives 8 and 9, relating more specifically to the Western Bosnian Front, of which General Milevanović was the commander in charge in July and August of 1995, refer directly to Directive Number 7. We shall show that it is unthinkable that General Milevanović had no knowledge of Directive Number 7. We shall also show that in April and May 1995, General Milevanović was monitoring on the ground the completion of tasks that he had set for the Eastern Bosnian Corps and the Drina Corps. These tasks, more specifically Operation Sprecha, derived directly from Directives 7 and 7.1 and were drafted in the orders that I have referred to earlier. General Simic, the then commander of Eastern Bosnian Corps, will discuss Operation Sprecha, the operation described in Directives 7 and 7.1. General Simic will also describe the role of officers serving the main staff in this operation. Now, why am I mentioning General Milevanović so much? Quite simply because the main piece of evidence for the responsibility of General Miletić, as supplied by the prosecutor, is the alleged absence of General Milevanović and the functions that General Miletić is supposed to have discharged in his absence. We shall show that this allegation from the point in time in which the directive was drafted and until June is erroneous. Now, to avoid any misinterpretation, we are not saying, as the defense of General Miletić, that General Milevanović would be responsible for anything. We are just trying to show that as a subordinate to General Milevanović, General Miletić cannot be held responsible for acts and decisions made at that point in time at the main staff and by the main staff of the VRS. Let us now move on to humanitarian aid. We are not saying that the humanitarian situation in Srebrenica wasn't difficult. We are not saying that there were no controls imposed on humanitarian convoys and there weren't any restrictions. However, we are not convinced that the humanitarian situation in the enclaves was the consequence and due to these controls and restrictions. Moreover, we deny the relationship between Directive 7 and the policy vis-à-vis humanitarian convoys. We also didn't object to the existence of a specific policy of a VRS relating to the humanitarian aid bound for Srebrenica and Žepa. We object to the allegations made by the prosecution, according to which General Miletić is meant to have had a key role in defining this policy vis-à-vis humanitarian aid convoys. Letting humanitarian aid go through is not an absolute right exercised unrestrictedly. Letting humanitarian aid through the territory of a party to a conflict and bound for the territory of another party to the conflict is bound by strict rules. We are not talking of internal rules but of the Republika Srpska, but of international rules derived from the Geneva Conventions. Before anyone could establish a restrictive policy on humanitarian aid, which would have made life untenable, we have first of all to establish that this humanitarian aid was being sent in accordance with international requirements or with the requirements of international humanitarian law, and that it was meant for the civilian population and used by the civilian population it was being sent to. We shall show, to dispel any doubts, that the authorities of Bosnia-Herzegovina did all they could to maintain a difficult humanitarian situation in the enclave. We shall show that the convoys supposedly transporting and conveying humanitarian aid in fact were laden with munition and weapons, and we shall show that humanitarian aid was in fact used to serve the needs of the Bosnia-Herzegovina army. Captain Novakovic, an officer of the Drina Corps, and Miss Maximovic, an officer in the Zvonik Brigade, will testify to that. Checking and controlling humanitarian aid is a right of the party to the conflict, which is letting this convoy go through its territory. Should any humanitarian aid convoys be used to transport illicit wares, the party which authorizes the transit is entitled to restrict humanitarian aid or even to cancel it in some extreme situations. We shall show that the authorities of Republika Srpska were founded in cancelling these convoys but never cancelled them. However, they did try and enforce a number of rules that should have been abided by. We hope to show that the policy of the Serbian authorities vis-à-vis humanitarian convoys was the result of the type of products being conveyed in these convoys and of the abusive use to which these convoys were put by the Bosnia-Herzegovina authorities. Indeed, they were being used for other purposes than humanitarian aid. You have already had an opportunity to see the evidence that these so-called humanitarian convoys in fact transported weapons and munition. We shall also show you that the actual humanitarian aid ended up in the warehouses of the Bosnia-Herzegovina army. Rather than being distributed to the civilian population, this aid was distributed to the military units of the Bosnia-Herzegovina army. As for the restrictions to humanitarian aid in 1995 as imposed by the Bosnian Serb authorities, we know that the prosecutor is arguing that this is the exact or the direct consequence of Directive Number 7. We shall show that the restriction to humanitarian aid goes back much further. For simple reasons, the reasons I have exposed, these restrictions went back to the beginning of the war. No specific changes intervened in the policy of the VRS after the adoption of Directive Number 7. We shall show that the situation in March, April and May of 1995 was not different from the situation in January and February 1995. It was not different from the situation in 1994. We shall show that in the period following the adoption of Directive Number 7, the monthly amount of humanitarian aid arriving in Srebrenica and Žepa enclaves was the same as the amount arriving before the directive. And we shall show that the amount of humanitarian aid in the enclaves in April and March 1995 was the same as what it had been in April and March of 1994. We shall show that the transport of some wares was still forbidden and restricted, and that these restrictions were unconnected with the military activities in eastern Bosnia in July of 1995, or with Directive Number 7 and the alleged determination to making life unbearable for the civilian population. These restrictions were applied on all fronts and determined by perfectly understandable military reasons. Transport of photo and video cameras was generally banned for quite simple reasons. No army, even in time of peace, ever allows for its units or its equipment and material to be filmed or that pictures should be taken of it. The passage of fuel was also limited from the very beginning of the war. You shall hear that humanitarian convoys moved with more difficulty when the relationship between the authorities in Republika Srpska and UNPROFOR were tense. You will also hear that before Directive Number 7 was adopted, there were tense moments during which there was less humanitarian traffic than at some points in times after Directive Number 7 was adopted and before the transit of humanitarian aid was completely suspended. We shall also show that the restrictions imposed to the convoys were unconnected to Directive number 7, and that there was no specific policy adopted regulating humanitarian aid to the enclaves in eastern Bosnia. On the contrary, we shall give evidence that the enclaves in eastern Bosnia were better provisioned in 1995 than other places.
Finalement,
Lastly, we shall talk about the role played by General Miletić as regards humanitarian aid. The prosecutor tendered into evidence those documents that had been sent to the subordinate units bearing the name of General Miletić, providing a simplistic explanation of these documents with no reference whatsoever to the procedure applied to humanitarian convoys established well before Directive 7 by the civilian and military authorities of the Republika Srpska. We will concentrate on specifying the exact nature of these documents, as well as the information sent to the subordinate units. We will specify which procedure is applied before these documents were sent that bore the name of General Miletić. You will understand that these documents were something like a pass for the convoys, and without these documents, no convoy could go through. In fact, what is important are those decisions that were taken upstream, the general decisions relating to the conditions of passage of the convoys, and specific decisions relating to the passage of individual convoys, thus determining which goods could be transported. As part of this trial, nobody has ever explained where and how and by whom these decisions were taken. Even though the defense does not need to adduce any proof of the innocence of the accused, we shall explain how this procedure worked, i.e., granting authorization for the convoys to go through. Understanding this procedure is essential, for it will enable us to understand which role General Miletić played in the issue of humanitarian convoys. Witness Kral, a staff officer who was working under the orders of Colonel Đurđić, the latter having been the officer in charge of humanitarian aid in the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska, member of the coordination body in charge of humanitarian aid, will try to explain who took those decisions relating to the passing of the humanitarian aid and how these decisions were actually taken.
What's this witness's name, this last witness that you have mentioned?
Kralj.
Kral. Kralj. Thank you, Your Honor. You have heard the UNPROFOR generals, General Smith and General Nicolai, the Commander and Chief of Staff of the United Nations Forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1995. They both mentioned those meetings they held in the presence of the authorities of the Republika Srpska, including the Serbian military authorities. They confirmed that during the period relevant to the indictment, they had no occasion to meet or contact General Miletić. General Miletić did not attend the meetings in the presence of UNPROFOR. He was not the contact person of UNPROFOR at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska. We will show that the procedure that applied to the convoys and the general policy adopted was addressed at these meetings, which were attended by representative of UNPROFOR and members of the Army of the Republika Srpska. General Miletić did not attend these meetings. You have, I'm sure, already wondered how it is that these generals, the commander and the chief of staff of UNPROFOR in Bosnia and Herzegovina, did not know General Miletić, the man who, according to paragraph 51 of the indictment, purportedly played a central role in imposing restrictions on humanitarian aid. Part of the answer is already contained in the case file. General Nicolai explained that when a question of this kind arose, the only only answer could be provided by the generals. We will demonstrate that General Nicolai was right and that it is quite logical that neither General Nicolai nor General Smith had any dealings with General Miletić. General Miletić was colonel until June 1995 and had no power or authority to negotiate with the UN generals or to take any decision relating to the passage of the convoys. We will show you the documents, the orders stemming from the Army of the Republika Srpska that indicate what general policy was adopted by the army as regards the convoy. All these orders, none of these orders is an order issued by General Miletić. All these orders go back to the period where General Milevanović, the chief of staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska, was indeed present at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska, and that these orders were not signed by General Mladić, they were signed precisely by General Milanović. But there's something even more important. We will show you how General Miletić did not decide which of the convoys or goods could pass. He signed the documents that were sent by the subordinate units indicating which convoys could pass and which had received authorization from the authority in charge. The only connection between Miletić and humanitarian aid was precisely this document, i.e. information sent out to the subordinate units indicating that the decision had been taken by the authorities in charge on the basis of orders and previously established rules. We shall demonstrate that without this document, the subordinate units could not have let the convoys go through, and as these documents can in no way be characterized as a contribution to the implementation of a policy applying to the passage of the convoys. Lastly, we shall talk about the situation in the area of the Drina Corps, the military operations that were conducted in the spring and in the summer of 1995, including July 1995, and the role played by the officers of the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska during the military operation conducted in the area of the Drina Corps during this period. We have already discussed the presence of General Milevanović in this area in the spring of 1995. We hope to show that in May 1995 he took part or attended the meetings at the command of the Drina Corps and approved those decisions and plans devised by this command. And after the departure of General Milanović, who left for the Krajina, no decision or plan was adopted by the Drina Corps at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska. We hope to demonstrate, although, that the separation of the enclaves was an ongoing task that had been given to the Drina Corps well before Directive Number 7 was drafted, and that was per se legitimate. Of course, we hope to demonstrate that the allegations made by the prosecution concerning the role played by General Miletić in the military operations conducted in the area of the Drina Corps are incorrect. Paragraph 52 of the indictment mentions the shelling of the enclaves and inter alia the shelling of the 25th of May 1995. The prosecutor alleges that the Prajanac Brigade shelled Srebrenica on the orders of the main staff of the Drina Corps. Even though we did hear about this shelling on the 25th of May 1995, we have never seen a single order sent by the main staff, and we hope to demonstrate that on the 25th of May 1995, General Miletić certainly did not issue or forward such an order, and that he was in no way involved in what was going on in Srebrenica. His immediate superior, General Milanović, was at the time at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska at Černa Rijeka. According to paragraph 53 of the indictment, the attack of the observation post Echo of the UNPROFOR was a prelude to the attack on the Srebrenica enclave. We will demonstrate that what the prosecution calls or qualifies as an attack on the Echo post was was in fact not connected to Operation Krivaya, but it was a secondary operation that had been triggered by the situation on the ground and undoubtedly had been required by the local civilian authorities. Witness Milenko Yevdovich will testify about this. We will also discuss the events in Srebrenica and Jepa in July 1995 and the role played by, or rather the absence of, General Miletić in these events. When we talk about the events in Srebrenica and Jepa in July 1995, it is important to emphasize the very special position General Miletić had in this trial. He is the only accused who went neither to Srebrenica nor to Jepa, whether it be before, during, or after the military operations in these areas. Admittedly, the criminal acts can be committed without the person or the perpetrator being physically present. However, we would like to draw your attention to the distances because in this particular case, distance is of the essence. Distance between where General Miletić was and where these criminal acts were committed. Because of General Miletić had no direct knowledge of what was happening on the ground. He relied on the reports provided by the main staff. And if these reports were erroneous, his perception was also erroneous. We will demonstrate that this is precisely what happened in July 1995. Pursuant to paragraph 75 of the indictment, General Miletić is accused of having monitored the Muslim forces during and after the attack on Srebrenica and Jepa, the surrender of the Muslim forces after the fall of Srebrenica and Jepa, the activities of the units of the Army of the Republika Srpska in the areas of Srebrenica and Jepa, and he is accused of having controlled the moment when the Muslim population moved out of the enclaves. We hope to prove that no officer can monitor and control such activities from a distance. Surveillance and control are tasks which can only be conducted on the spot where things are happening. Throughout this entire trial, the prosecution has tried to convince us that General Miletić was a key man, the advisor to General Miletić, who was coordinating everything that was going on. He purportedly has been the coordinator throughout the entire period of 1995 and also in July 1995. We have already indicated that we will adduce evidence confirming that General Milanović was at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska in Černá Rijeka in the first half of 1995. And we will now focus our attention on July 1995. You have heard that General Milanović was not there at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska at Černá Rijeka in July 1995, and we do not challenge that. However, you have heard also that General Milanović was indeed there and attended the lunch hosted in honor of General Jivanović on the 20th of July 1995. General Milanović does not deny that he was during the entire period of 1995 Chief of Staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska, and we shall show that he was permanently at General Mladić's disposal. He could be contacted at any time and be consulted as required. If General Miletić were to replace him at the staff of the main staff, there would be no reason for him to replace him alongside General Mladić, and we will show that he never replaced him in any position that goes beyond that of a position in the staff of the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska. But let's take it a step further. The prosecution alleges that General Miletić must have been at the main staff headquarters because in his position he was coordinating and centralizing everything, liaising between General Mladić, his assistants, and subordinate units. We will show that this was not the role played by General Miletić and that he never had such authority. We know that General Mladić was on the ground and in Srebrenica and Jepa in July 1995. We will also show you that General Miletić, as officer in charge of the operations, should have accompanied General Mladić if he had been, in one way or another, involved in these operations. In July 1995, in Srebrenica and Jepa, General Mladić did not need a go-between. He didn't need a go-between, for he was there himself. He was there alongside General Krstić and could give his orders directly. As far as the connection between him and President Karadzic and the reports that were sent to him that are alleged in paragraph 75b and c of the indictment, we will show that these reports cannot per se constitute a criminal act. The drafting of these reports was the daily task and regular task of the body in charge of such operations. These reports, daily reports, did indeed describe what the situation on the ground was, but this description was not the result of the observation on the ground made by General Miletić, but based on the reports of the main staff that he received. Evidence will show that these reports were neither contacts nor the main links between President Karadzic with the Army of the Republika Srpska, nor the main source of the information he received regarding the situation on the ground. The reports that were sent to President Karadzic in July 1995 bore the name of General Miletić. They bear his name, but not his signature. And the prosecutor has never proven that he had, in fact, signed these documents during the relevant period. Why is this signature important? The signature is important because in July 1995, during the military operation in and around Srebrenica, General Miletić could not have signed these reports because he was not at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska in Crna Rijeka. He was in Belgrade, where his daughter was on the 10th of July 1995 celebrating her 18th birthday. You will hear testimonies of her daughter and other people who attended the birthday party, thus confirming that General Miletić learned about the entrance of the Army of the Republika Srpska into Srebrenica when he was in Belgrade. We will show that before going off to Belgrade, General Miletić did not know that the Army of the Republika Srpska was going to enter Srebrenica. He could not know that because the order given to enter the enclave was given on the 9th of July 1995, and we will show that on the 9th of July 1995, General Miletić was in Belgrade with his family. In July 1995, whatever his knowledge may have been about the military operations conducted by the Drina Corps, if ever he did know anything, he was not concerned by this. He had left for Belgrade, he had been allowed to go to Belgrade, and he had been allowed to leave because his presence at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska was not required, not needed. Admittedly, General Miletić returns on the 12th of July 1995 and is at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska. He is there, but what does he do? How does he behave, and what are his intentions? What does he know about the events that were unfolding in Popović? We will show that General Miletić did not take part in any way in what happened in Srebrenica and Jepa in the summer of 1995, and he could in no way influence these events. We will also show that when General Miletić came back to the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska in Černá Rijeka, he did not receive any reliable information concerning the situation on the ground. His understanding of the knowledge of the situation was quite approximative. All he could have known is that the Muslim civilian population had been evacuated to Popović in the direction of the territory under the control of Bosnia-Herzegovina. But each officer of the Army of the Republika Srpska, each officer of the Drina Corps and the main staff knew that also at that time. So this knowledge per se has no significance. In July 1995, General Miletić was not in Srebrenica, he was not in Bratunac, he was not in Potočari either. He did not attend those meetings at the Hotel Fontana. He did not know what the position of the Dutch bat was. He did not know what the representatives of the Muslim community wanted or did not want. And we will show that General Miletić could not know and did not know what the conditions were in Potočari. He could not know either under which circumstances the evacuation had taken place. And we will stress this as far as General Miletić is concerned. What is important is not what happened, but General Miletić's perception was. He was not there, and at no time did he go there. When these military operations were being conducted in Žepa, General Miletić was still in Černá Rijeka. He was not in Žepa. He was not attending the meetings in the presence of the representatives of the Muslim populations. He did not attend the meetings with the UNPROFOR members. We do not deny the fact that General Miletić may have been informed about these meetings. He may have known that an evacuation of Žepa was being negotiated, but we will show that it's precisely because he knew that the evacuation was being negotiated and because he knew that the UNPROFOR representatives and other international organizations were involved, that he could reasonably think that these evacuations, that he could not reasonably think that these evacuations could contain the seeds of a criminal act. You know that General Mladic was in Žepa, as was General Tolimir, and that these negotiations were taking place in Žepa also. We should show that all the decisions were taken in Žepa and that General Miletić and the other officers in Černá Rijeka were involved neither involved in any military operation or in the evacuation of Žepa. General Obradović, who was the immediate superior of General Miletić, came back from sick leave on the 17th of July 1995 and as of the 17th of July 1995 onwards, together with General Miletić, was at the main staff of the Army of the Republika Srpska at Černá Rijeka. Will say that the officers at the staff at Černá Rijeka, including General Miletić, will talk about what they knew about Žepa. We will show that in July 1995, the only information that General Miletić had about the situation in Srebrenica and Žepa was the information that was communicated to him in those reports.
Fast, I think the interpreters are beginning to miss things.
Was assuming that they have a copy of your, because otherwise I was quite sure that I wouldn't have been able to catch up. So they do have a copy.
Please slow down somewhat, please. Thank you.
Yes, still there is a request that you slow down somewhat, Ms. Favreau.
Si le procureur souhaite, je peux
Like.
dernière partie si c'est nécessaire.
Can we proceed, or do you wish Ms. Favreau to go back?
En tout cas, Monsieur le Président, il y a une erreur assez importante dans cette partie, donc je pense qu'il vaut mieux que je répète au moins le début.
Okay, let's proceed, and just slow down a little bit. I mean, I was assuming all the way that they had a copy of
Et
it.
juste à la page 85,
Page 85, line 5. It should read General Miletić.
Okay.
nous allons démontrer qu'en juillet
We will show that in July 1995, the only information that General Miletić had on the situation in Srebrenica and Zepa was the information that had been forwarded to him in those reports he received. Taking delivery of the reports does not show in any way that there is a criminal intent. This was a part of his daily tasks. In addition, we have every intention of proving that those reports he received in July 1995 were insufficient, inaccurate, and sometimes vague. Admittedly, the army of the Republika Srpska was organized and structured, and the reports were sent by the subordinate units. However, we will adduce evidence showing that the material situation was difficult, that the equipment of the Republika Srpska was not the best in the world, that there were technical failings and other problems, and that the reports were not always so accurate. General Miletić had information which was sent to him. He had no direct knowledge of these events. He did not influence them in any way, and he could not influence them in any way. We do not deny that the task of General Miletić was to follow the situation on the front lines in Republika Srpska, but we insist on the term follow. For following does not mean monitoring or controlling. The terms monitor and control, contrary to the term follow, involve an active role. We will show that there is a difference between these terms, and we will prove that General Miletić did not play an active role. General Miletić was not there to influence the situation on the front, but forward to General Mladic in as reliable a fashion as possible the information he had received. We will also show that the major concern of General Miletić in July 1995 was not the Eastern Bosnian Front. General Mladic was there, and General Miletić was of no help to him. As far as that was concerned, General Miletić knew the situation much better than he did. General Mladic knew the situation much better than did General Miletić.
Comme le général
Since General Mladic had more information than General Miletić on the Eastern Bosnian fronts, he did not need General Miletić to inform him about anything concerning the situation in Eastern Bosnia. However, he did need General Miletić to provide him with information about the situation on the other fronts, i.e. the fronts in the areas of the 1st and 2nd Corps of the Krajina, the Sarajevo Corps, the Eastern Bosnia Corps, and the Herzegovina Corps. And it was this task that General Miletić devoted himself essentially to in July 1995. We will show that what is important is not the main staff of an army per se, but the command that is located there. When the commander and his close associates are not at the main staff, decisions were not taken in Crna Rijeka. But it is where the commander and the command were. The fact that General Miletić remained in Cherna Rijeka when the entire command was elsewhere does not show that he was important. Quite the opposite. This fact ascertains that General Mladic did not need General Miletić to take his decisions. That said, we do not want to undermine the role and position of General Miletić in the army of the Republika Srpska. We wish to acknowledge his due role. His role was important in the running of the army, but the army of the Republika Srpska was not per se a joint criminal enterprise, and any contribution to the running of it was not criminal either. What is important, and this is what the prosecutor needs to prove beyond any reasonable doubt, are criminal intent and acts that contributed to the commission of crimes. We will show that these evidence does not exist because General Miletić did not in any way participate or contribute to the tragic events of Srebrenica and Žipa in July 1995. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Favot.
Madame Favot, sorry. I just thought it would perhaps be easier now. There were a couple of errors I noticed in the transcript because I was listening to you in French. But at page, and just two that I'll bring to your attention, page 76, line 18, I'm pretty sure that what you said was, and I'm just scrolling back, what you said was that you have heard the UNPROFOR generals, General Smith and General Nicolai, but it reads at the moment you have heard General Smith and General, in this case, lie. So I think that needs to be corrected. And page 77, line 23, it says, and that these orders were not signed by General Mladic. I'm pretty sure that should have been Miletić as opposed to Mladic. Page 77, line 23.
Effectivement, là, il n'était jamais signé.
Indeed, you're right. They were never signed by General Miletić. And if they were signed by anyone, Mladic or Milovanovic.
Okay, then that would make more sense. Thank you. I just want to bring those to
Je
your
vous
attention.
remercie beaucoup.
Okay.
Thank you, madam.
There are further names and things missing, but I'm sure they will be taken care of. Do you have a witness present? Shall we start with him now? Or?
Oui, Monsieur le Président, nous avons.
We do, Your Honor.
The witness in, please. Start him off. Good evening and welcome to this tribunal. You've been summoned by the defense team for General Miletić. Before you start giving evidence, you are required by our rules to make a solemn declaration that in the course of your testimony you will be testifying the truth. Text has just been handed to you now. Please read it out aloud, and that will be your solemn undertaking with us.
Good evening. I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please make yourself comfortable. Madame Favot will be asking you some questions. I need to advise you, or Mr. Petrusic, I need to advise you that it's very unlikely that we will finish with your testimony today or tomorrow. Today we have only got 15 minutes, but I don't envisage that we will finish tomorrow either. So you will be here and over the weekend and then continue on Monday. Mr. Petrusic.
Thank you and good evening, Your Honours. Good evening, Mr. Obradović. Answer. Good evening. Question. At the outset, for the record, please state your name. Answer. Ljubomir Obradović, born on the 30th of January 1950 in Visegrad, Republic of Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Interpreter's correction, Republika Srpska, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Question. Can you briefly tell us about your background in terms of education, both civilian and military? Answer. The first 8 forms of elementary school, that was in Visegrad. In 1968, or rather from 1968 to 1972, the military academy for the ground forces in Belgrade. After that, between 72 and 77, I served in the school for reserve officers, infantry, in Miletić. Between 1977 and 1980, or rather 1988, I served in Belgrade. Having completed the Staff Command School for Tactics, I was deployed to the Derventa garrison and I served there as Chief of Staff of the 327th Motorized Brigade. After Derventa, once the war had begun, I was transferred to the main staff. It was on the 1st of September 1994 that I reported to the main staff at Crna Rijeka. I then became chief of the operative department for training and operations of the main staff of the army of Republika Srpska. I remained in that position until the war ended. Question. What were your duties before the war? Answer. Before the war, I was platoon commander in the School for Reserve Officers and company commander at the Military Academy for Ground Forces. I taught firing lessons to soldiers at Derventa in the 327th. I was Chief of Staff and also a Deputy Commander. Then there were 2 further 6-month cycles in addition to my regular duty as Chief of Staff. I also performed the duties of commander of the 327th Motorized Brigade because the commander, Colonel Žiča Rasuljević, had retired on account of his age. These were the duties that I performed before the war. Question. General, when the war broke out, at which rank were you holding in Derventa? Answer. Lieutenant Colonel.
Kad ste došli u glavni štab, kako kažete, 1. septembra 95. godine.
Question. When you arrived at the main staff in September 1994, what was the rank you held at the time? Answer. Lieutenant Colonel. Question. Who was your direct superior when you came to the main staff? Answer. Chief of Training and Operations, Colonel Radivoj Miletić. He was a colonel at the time.
Recite mi do kog vremena.
Question. Did you stay in that position at that place throughout the war? Answer. Establishment-wise, I remained chief of the operations department, but I had different duties all along the front line at different points in time. Question. Can we now please have 5D 1039? Your Honor, Mr. President, there will be a whole succession of documents now. Therefore, there is a binder that has been provided with all these documents in it. The OTP have had a chance to inspect the documents and no objections were raised about any additions or anything like that. This is simply for ease of handling and in order to make it more convenient for the witness during his examination.
Thank you. Let's hear Mr. McCloskey.
Yes, we have no objections, but perhaps for clarification, my notes indicate that he was the chief of operations and training under Miletić, who was chief of operations and training, and so that can't be right. So I don't know if there's a translation issue or something else going on. We also don't have, I don't see any history from 91, 92, 93. If that was, if it was there, I didn't catch it. So just that might help clarify before we start getting into documents.
Yes, Mr. Petrosic.
Okay. Gospodin
General Obradović, let us first remove any doubt. Or rather, let's take this in chronological order. Your war biography. Between 1992 and your arrival at the main staff. Answer. When the war broke out, I was Chief of Staff and also Deputy Commander of the 327th Motorized Brigade at Derventa. I remained in that position until another commander was appointed, and that was before I arrived at the main staff. Do you want to know about the deployment of the units or anything like that? Question. I believe this is quite sufficient for our purposes. Thank you. What about 1994, the 1st of September? You say you came to the main staff on that day. Please, sir. Give me a chance to finish my question. Thank you. What was the duty that you performed when you came to the main staff? Answer. Chief of the Operations Department. And this was part of operations and training. That department, and the department was headed by Colonel Miletić. I was in the operations department. Question. I'm not sure if this is sufficient for the prosecutor's purposes in terms of distinction. I would like to ask the usher.
One moment, I see Ms. Favreau on her feet.
Je crois qu'il y a un problème de traduction.
Miss Fovo, I think there's a problem in translation. The witness was head of operations, but General Miletić was a chief of administration for operations and training.
Thank you for that. Mr. Petrosic, we have 5 minutes left. Just want you to make sure that you can deal with something useful in these 5 minutes, otherwise we adjourn.
I'm about to move on to documents that may require more time.
And that's why I intervened. We stand adjourned till tomorrow. Mr. Obradović will continue tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning. In the meantime, you are not to discuss with anyone or allow anyone to discuss with you the subject matter of your testimony.
I understand.
All rise. Fiquez-vous le faire.